Hey, what's up, and welcome to Q&A, the show where I take your questions from YouTube and answer them here in video format. Just a reminder, just so you guys know how to ask these questions, how to get these questions on the show. You want to make sure you're subscribed. Obviously, you want to make sure you're notified so you can get the community post that I put up either on Wednesday or Thursday evening for you guys to ask questions on. And I take the questions from there. I know a lot of you guys drop questions in the comment sections of different videos. Unfortunately, there's too many comments. Well, fortunately, unfortunately, there's too many comments, and it's hard for me to kind of sift through questions that way. So putting it in that community tab prompt, that's how, or that's the best way for me to be able to get a hand on your question and be able to answer it. I know every week there's somebody in the comment section wondering why their question didn't get answered. More than likely it's because I didn't see it because you didn't put it in the question prompt. But now let's actually jump into these questions. We're going to start with a question from Ralph Miller, who says, hey Q, with everybody saying the Browns are in win now mode and won't be able to keep everyone, do you think we can keep everyone like Kansas City or Tampa Bay did? You know, this is going to be hugely dependent on a couple of things. The salary cap is going to be one of them. And we have seen in the last few years the salary cap be extremely flexible. I'm wondering if they're going to do a crackdown on that sometime soon, because at this point it's a little bit too flexible. Or I wonder if like a bubble is going to burst when it comes to how teams have been super flexible with the cap space. That's something to look out for. It seems like there is a trend here that's going on with the cap space that I don't think is going to last very long. Now, what does this mean for the Browns? I don't know. The cap number is going to go up. They renegotiated that TV deal, so that number is going to go up. I don't know if that just means that the percentage of money is going to go up, right? So as always in a salary cap sport, it's going to be hard to maintain and keep everybody. It's going to take pay cuts for multiple players. And while pay cuts would be appreciated in a sport like football, I just don't think it's fair to ask players to take less than what they're worth when their ability to get that worth is so limited in football, right? You're talking about, you know, for most players, especially like a running back, 2-3 years that you're going to be able to get your top worth. It's kind of unpredictable. And over the last few years, I've learned a ton about the salary cap. And the more you learn about the salary cap, the more you know better than to try to predict things with the salary cap or say anything definitively when it comes to the salary cap, because we actually know nothing about the salary cap. For Kansas City and Tampa Bay, look, I think they're in the right place, right time, where some of these rules were flexible enough for them to be able to keep everybody. And if that maintains, so when, you know, the Cleveland Browns are going to need to re-sign everybody, then they might be able to do it. But, you know, we'll see. We'll see how these things go moving forward. The next question comes from Adam, who says, what's up, Quincy? I'm pretty devastated that Sheldon Richardson signed with the Vikings for $3 million. Do you think we could have restructured his deal and have avoided losing a good player now that he's gone? Do we try to get Geno Atkins, Justin Houston? And I'll talk about Gilmore later. But I think this was kind of inevitable. When the Browns went into the draft and they took Tommy Togiai and they brought in Malik McDowell and, you know, they brought in Marvin Wilson, that was a wrap on Sheldon Richardson, to be honest with you guys. Like, at that point, I felt like, yeah, it was pretty much done for Sheldon Richardson here. You know, and I don't think a restructure would have done anything. You know, I just don't think they wanted to have Sheldon Richardson on the team at veteran prices. Look, what they're betting on and what they want to see is more out of Jordan Elliott, is more out of the younger defensive tackles that they have invested in already. They don't necessarily want to see much more of Sheldon Richardson for whatever reason. So that was kind of expected. And as far as anybody to replace him, no, I don't think they're going to replace him with anybody. I think the replacement is going to be one of the young guys, because I think that's who they want to see step up, because that's what makes sense financially for the team. Look, I love Sheldon Richardson. I wish Sheldon Richardson could still be on this team. But, you know, once the draft happened, it seemed pretty inevitable that the Browns had no plans with Sheldon Richardson in the future. Next question comes from Andrew, who says, hey, Q, after last year's training camp, had a lot of significant injuries from guys you expected to be contributors. Do you think the defense this year is going to be deep enough to withstand injuries, essentially. So, yeah, they're much deeper than they were last year. I think last year they had enough talent. They just lost a lot of guys early on in the process, which made things difficult. I mean, they were routinely starting Robert Jackson, routinely starting MJ Stewart, who would be, guys that you would want to see on special teams most of the time. So, yeah, they're much deeper than they were last year. They can withstand one or two more injuries than they could last year. They're not the deepest secondary in football by any means, but I do think they're much deeper. You got somebody like Troy Hill, who's an insurance policy for whatever happens on the other side of the ball, opposite of Denzel Ward, and then he's also a really good slot corner. So you have more assurances and more backup plans than you did last year, and ultimately I think that's going to help the defense a lot because we know in football, injuries happen. Next question comes from Arav, who says, who is the defensive end the Browns might trade for to assure a future position outside of Myles Garrett, and how much should the Browns invest for that player? I don't know if it's going to be a trade. I think it's likely that it could be free agency. I also think it's more likely it's going to be in the draft, right? I think the Browns are going to invest next year's draft in defensive end because you look at the situation for this year. Wow, it's good for this year. Takk McKinley's going to be off the books. Jadeveon Clowney is going to be off the books, so either you're going to sign a free agent long-term or you're more than likely going to draft somebody. Next question comes from Malik from the Ultimate Sports TV, who says, who's a better bet for comeback player of the year, Clowney or OBJ, and what kind of stat lines for the two are you predicting? Y'all know I don't predict stat lines, and Malik, you know I don't predict stat lines. But as far as comeback player of the year for Clowney or OBJ, look, I think it's probably more likely that OBJ could win this versus Clowney, ultimately because let's say they both have great seasons, right? Clowney has 12, 13 sacks. Odell has 13 touchdowns, 1,300 yards. That 13 touchdowns, 1,300 yards is just going to be more talked about. And since a lot of negativity has been thrown Odell's way in the last few years, I think people will be more willing to kind of give him that credit of coming back, and give him the Comeback Player of the Year award. And ultimately, it's a sexier narrative to give the Comeback Player of the Year award to for Odell. And I think he's done a lot of work in building that narrative, everything he's done in the offseason. So I think it would be much easier for Odell to win Comeback Player of the Year versus Jadeveon. I mean, Jadeveon, you're talking about having to get like 13, 14 sacks and maybe even outshining Myles Garrett a little bit to get that award. Odell, all he has to be is what he used to be, and he'll get that award. Next question comes from Hank Fraley. I think that used to be the name of a offensive lineman for the Cleveland Browns back in 05 and 06. If Garrett and Clowney both stay healthy throughout the season, what do you think their total sack number could be? See, Clowney, I probably would say Clowney will get, if he's healthy, about 10.5 to 11 sacks. And I think that Myles, if Clowney is healthy the whole season, could probably get his floor is about 13.5. I think his ceiling would be about 19 to 20. If he has a monster year, could obviously be higher than that. So I'll say Myles 16.5, Clowney 11.5. So about 28. I think you could probably say between 25 to 30 sacks combined would be the hopeful expectation if both could stay healthy. But thank you for the question. The next question comes from James, who says, hey, Q, I want to ask you a question. For the right price, would you consider trading for Gilmore for a second-round pick? Absolutely no, not for a second-round pick. One, a second-round pick is extremely valuable, and at this point, you might be able to find a corner who could be as good as Gilmore for the future. With a second-round pick, no disrespect to Stephon Gilmore, but he's been injured, he's older, so there are those question marks for him, and I think a second-round pick for him is high, especially as he's coming back off an injury, and given how much he's paid, you also have to consider that. I wouldn't do a second-round pick. Look, Gilmore's going to have to be dealt for probably like a 4th or 5th-round pick because that contract is really what gets in the way. He's older. He's coming off an injury. The Patriots don't even want to pay him that $15 million. I don't think anybody else wants to pay him that $15 million. So unless he agrees to restructure, I don't think that he's going to be traded for such a high draft pick, despite being a guy who almost won Defensive Player of the Year a few years ago. The next question comes from Cody Jordan, who says, "Hey Q, do you think it's a bust if the Browns don't make the AFC Championship this year?" This is a interesting question because I've gone on record saying that the expectations sometimes for this team can be a little modest within the fan base. But also, given that this team hasn't achieved anything in the last 20 years, saying you would be disappointed with the AFC Championship game does sound kind of like odd and almost entitled in a way. So I get why people are hesitant to say that they would be disappointed with that. As with anything, it's going to matter what the ride is like, right? Some things don't feel like disappointments. Some things do feel like disappointments. One of the greatest examples I have is my dad with the Cleveland Indians, right? He is a huge Cleveland Indians fan. And he has talked to me more about the regret of not winning the World Series in 95 than he has about 97. And I think that has a lot to do with the ride, right? In the 97, the Indians kind of just got there. They weren't supposed to be there, and they came really close, but it wasn't like they were supposed to be there. In 95, they had Manny Ramirez batting ninth. Like, it was a different level of roster. So ultimately, you're more disappointed that you lost that World Series in 6 games than the one you lost in extra innings in 7, right? So one, it's always going to be about the ride, whether the season feels disappointed. Because if they don't get to the AFC Championship game, but they have a historic number of injuries and they play really well, then you're not going to be that upset. But if they are healthy and they don't get to the AFC Championship game, we may not feel disappointed or super disappointed in the moment, but 5-10 years from now, when we look at this roster, we will be disappointed and we will lament that. So I truly think this is a roster that you're going to want to at least see get to a Super Bowl. And if you don't, it's going to ultimately, when time bears this thing out, feel like a huge missed opportunity. So while I'm not saying, it's Super Bowl or bust, I am saying that we are going to regret it if this team doesn't achieve more, because I don't know how possible it is to routinely get a roster like this on a football team in the salary cap age. So that's where I'm at with it. I hope that analogy made sense for y'all, but that's it for this week's questions. Again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.